The brush system inside of ZBrush is incredibly powerful, and we've only begun to scratch the surface. But what I want to show you now is how you can save and create your own custom brushes once you have things set up the way you want. The first thing I want to do is just show you some of my own custom brushes. This is a brush I use for sculpting clothing detail all the time. As I run this along the surface, I can quite easily represent where I want the stitching. There's about 3 features that are really responsible for this brush's behavior. First one is roll. Roll allows this tileable alpha to just kind of roll the stroke on and still constantly repeat itself. If roll was off, then I would just get a straight line as this alpha is essentially dragged through the surface. The other feature that makes this possible is mid-value. Notice that this is actually pushing out and in at the same time. In order for that to happen, you have to use mid-value. And what mid-value does is just decide what grayscale value is 0 displacement. So notice that my alpha has a 50% grayscale background. Black where I want it to dig in, and tending towards white where the string is where I want it to lift. This is allowing the push in, push out. Now let's see what mid-value is really doing. If we set this to 0, then black is going to mean 0 displacement, which means that my 50% gray background is going to lift. As I increase my mid-value, let's say to 25, that background is going to start to sink deeper into the model. Let's set it to 35. Sinking deeper until it disappears at 50. At this point, you don't even see the background. It's just pushing in and pulling out. As we increase this value, that's going to change. Now, instead of lifting, it's pushing and pushing inwards. So you want to find that 50% value, or that value that lets the background just kind of disappear. The other thing that's making this brush possible is really that alpha. That alpha is really key. So let's take a look at creating our own brushes and starting over at scratch with an alpha very similar to this. So I'm going to select the standard brush. And this is really the first thing that you need to do. You need to define or decide what your base type is going to be. So you could be using the clay brush as your base type. But the seam brush works really well with the standard brush. So with the standard brush selected, I'm going to go to the brush palette and clone it. That creates a duplicate so that I don't accidentally start changing and modifying the default standard brush, which I have set up to hotkeys and everything else. So I'm going to work on this, and the first thing I want to do is import my alpha. So let's get over into Photoshop and take a look at these alphas. So I've already got a document open, and this is a master document where I have all of my different stitching and experiments with it. So let's take our fold and stitch. We have a 50% background. We've got this gradient where the form swells here and then tapers off. We've got our black line where the stitching is going to be pressing into the surface. We have it here where the hole is, where it digs in, our string. And then here's just a tileable version of that. Now once you have an alpha like this created, which we do as a 16-bit grayscale image. 16-bit is the default depth for ZBrush's alphas. So if you make it as an 8-bit, then ZBrush has to convert it to a 16-bit, which is going to soften things. So try to keep it as a 16-bit, and then you'll be able to get the most detail. Save the document, come back into ZBrush and import that alpha. There we go. Now, as we saw before, if I just drag this on, it's not going to have the effect I want. We need to make sure to turn roll on. But now we need to make sure to turn mid value on. So let's set this back to 50. And let's make sure to adjust our Z intensity so that we're getting the results that we want. We could add lazy mouse so that we can create a cleaner stroke if we wanted to. And then all we have to do is just save this brush. So we go into the brush palette, choose Save As, and there we go. Now if we've saved this into some place on a hard drive, then we're always going to have to load that. But if we want this to load with ZBrush every single time we start ZBrush, we need to make sure to save it in a specific place. You need to make sure to save it in the Z Startup, Brush Presets, and then every time you start ZBrush, it'll be right there. The final thing that you want to do is change this icon. And that's really easy. You just go into the brush palette, you say select icon, you navigate to wherever that alpha was, just use the same alpha, and there you go. Now we should save this now that we have actually created the icon. So make sure to save as, save it in the Z Startup, or save it into a folder on your drive, and then you'll be able to reuse and go to town from there.